The gavel fell, not with a crack of authority, but with a dull, dismissive thud that seemed to absorb all the oxygen in the room. "Ma'am," Judge Harrison's voice boomed, dripping with a condescending patience that was far more insulting than outright anger. "This court requires clarity, not vague allusions to your service. Was the defendant negligent, yes or no?" In the witness box sat Anya Petrova. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable. A woman in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe functional knot. She wore a simple gray blazer, her posture impossibly straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. But a closer look revealed a story of its own. A faint, silver scar cut a delicate line just above her right eyebrow, a permanent accent of violence on a face defined by a profound stillness. Her eyes, a deep and startling cobalt, weren't looking at the judge with fear or defiance, but with the placid analytical gaze of someone assessing a target. She was a statue of composure in a sea of manufactured tension. The air in the courtroom was stale, tasting of old paper, cheap polish, and the faint, anxious sweat of those whose fates hung in the balance. Anya felt the familiar itch of the witness chair's cheap fabric through her slacks. It was a minor discomfort, a background noise she catalogued and dismissed, just as she had dismissed the sting of sandblasted winds and the gnawing ache of muscles pushed beyond their limits. Judge Harrison, a man whose face was a fleshy monument to a life of soft chairs and unchallenged authority, saw a difficult woman. He saw someone who refused to give him the simple emotional response he could manipulate. He didn't see the truth. He didn't see the ghost standing behind her. "Your Honor," Anya's voice was low and even devoid of the tremor the prosecuting attorney had hoped for. To answer yes or no would be an oversimplification of a complex failure in extreme pressure circumstances. The judge leaned forward, his black robes rustling like the wings of a carrion crow. "Extreme pressure? Ms. Petrova, you were a logistics coordinator according to this file. Let's not dramatize a simple supply chain issue. Your testimony is meant to clarify whether the defendant, Mr. Gable, provided faulty equipment to the military. It's a simple matter of mechanics, not a Hollywood film. Logistics coordinator." The title was a sterile bureaucratic shroud thrown over a reality of blood, dust, and whispered prayers in the dark. It was the name they gave her on paper, the one that kept the real truth buried deep in redacted files. Her mind flickered, not with anger, but with memory. The memory wasn't a fuzzy recollection. It was a sensory immersion. She could taste the metallic tang of the Kandahar air, thick with pulverized earth and the distant acrid perfume of cordite. She could feel the solid, reassuring weight of the Mk-13 rifle against her shoulder, its cold steel a familiar and intimate extension of her own will. She remembered the sun, a merciless, white-hot hammer in the sky, baking the very thoughts from your head until all that was left was instinct, training, and the voice of your spotter in your ear. Her spotter, Ben, he was the reason she was here, not for herself, but for his widow, who sat silently in the front row, clutching a worn photograph. Ben, who had bled out in her arms, because a climbing harness clip, supplied by Mr. Gable's company, had shattered under pressure. The clip was a tiny piece of metal, but in their world, the smallest detail could be the difference between a breath and a ghost. The judge called it a simple matter of mechanics. Ben's last breath had been a ragged, choked whisper, a sound that was anything but simple. He had told her to make sure his daughter knew he loved her. A promise was a promise. And for people like Anya, a promise was as sacred as the mission itself. "The integrity of a piece of equipment is not a matter of logistics, Your Honor," Anya stated, her gaze unwavering. "It's a matter of life and death. The conditions under which that equipment was tested were extreme. The pressure was absolute." Judge Harrison's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He detested being corrected, especially by a woman he had already filed away in his mind as insignificant. He saw her composure not as strength, but as arrogance. "And what would you know of absolute pressure, Ms. Petrova?" He sneered, his voice echoing with theatrical disdain. "Did you break a nail filing paperwork? Perhaps you missed your morning latte." This courtroom is not a stage for your exaggerated sense of self-importance. The courtroom fell into a deep, uncomfortable silence. The jury shifted in their seats. Mr. Gable, the defendant, smirked, sensing the judge was on his side. Anya's public defender, a young man barely out of law school, started to rise, a feeble objection, on his lips. But the judge waved him down with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. He was enjoying this. He was making an example of her. Anya remained still, a rock against which the judge's ego crashed and broke. Inside her, however, a cold tide was rising. It was the same feeling she got before a shot. When the world narrowed to the crosshairs, her heartbeat slowed to a deliberate, metronomic rhythm, and every sensation became hyperacute. She could feel the subtle draft from the air conditioning vent on her neck. She could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. She could see the tiny bead of sweat tracing a path down the side of the judge's temple. He thought this was his arena, his kill box. He was mistaken. She had faced down warlords with cold, dead eyes, and men whose souls had been hollowed out by fanaticism. This man, this preening figure of petty power, was nothing. Yet the disrespect he showed wasn't for her. It was for Ben. It was for all the names memorialized on silent, polished walls. It was a stain on their sacrifice. In the back of the courtroom, an old man sat alone. He wore a faded blue VFW cap, his face a road map of wrinkles carved by time and worry. He had been watching Anya not as a witness, but as a soldier. He recognized the bearing, the economy of movement, the unyielding stillness that could only be forged in the crucible of conflict. He saw what the judge could not, the steel beneath the quiet exterior. He leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the bench in front of him. He knew something was about to happen. The judge, emboldened by her silence, pressed his attack. The defendant's counsel has raised a legitimate question about your credibility and expertise. You claim this equipment failed under duress, but the court has seen no evidence that you possess any relevant expertise. You were overseas, yes, but doing what? What specialized knowledge do you bring to this courtroom that qualifies you to make such a judgment? He leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. Tell us, Ms. Petrova, what makes you an expert? This was the moment. The precipice. Her training, her entire operational life, was built on anonymity. SEAL were the quiet professionals. You were a ghost. You were never there. To reveal herself was to break a sacred unspoken vow. But to remain silent was to let this man, in his cushioned chair in his climate-controlled world, desecrate the memory of a warrior. Her internal battle was fierce but brief. This was no longer about protocol. It was about honor, Ben's honor. Anya met the judge's gaze, and for the first time, she let a flicker of the ice within her show. Sir, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. Some things are earned in silence, and can only be understood by those who were there. The judge scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Philosophy will not win this case, Miss Petrova. The court requires proof, tangible evidence of your so-called expertise. Present something, anything, that validates your claims, or I will hold you in contempt and your entire testimony will be struck from the record. Anya held his gaze for one final long second. Then she nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. As you wish, Your Honor. Her movements were fluid, economical, honed by 1,000 repetitions in darkness and under fire. There was no wasted motion. She reached inside her gray blazer, into a small, hidden pocket sewn into the lining. The entire courtroom held its breath, leaning forward as one. What was she doing? Pulling out a document? A photograph? She drew out a small, rectangular piece of fabric and placed it gently on the wooden railing of the witness box. It landed with no sound, yet its impact was as profound and as devastating as a bomb. It was a patch, worn, frayed at the edges, and stained with the faint rust-colored memory of foreign soil. The design was stark, almost brutal. A skull superimposed over a Navy SEAL trident with 2 crossed sniper rifles beneath it. It was a kill patch, a deeply unofficial, intensely personal symbol carried by members of the most elite units. This one was unique, instantly recognizable to the very few who knew what it represented. It wasn't just a SEAL patch, it was from DEVGRU, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the elite of the elite. Tier 1. The old man in the VFW cap rose slowly to his feet. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood, his back ramrod straight, his hand coming up in a slow, trembling salute. It was an act of pure, unadulterated respect. The prosecutor, a man in his late 40s with a military-style haircut, froze mid-sip from his glass of water. He had served 4 years in the JAG Corps. He had seen briefings, reviewed after-action reports. He recognized the iconography. He knew what it meant. He knew the caliber of human being required to earn such a thing. A cold dread, mingled with a profound sense of awe, washed over him. He slowly lowered his glass, his eyes wide, fixed on Anya. He suddenly understood. He wasn't just looking at a witness. He was in the presence of a legend. Judge Harrison, however, saw none of this. He saw only a piece of cloth. He squinted, annoyed. What is this? Some kind of souvenir? The court bailiff, a burly former Marine with a stoic demeanor, moved with a sudden sharp urgency. He stepped up to the bench and leaned in close to the judge's ear, his voice a low, intense whisper that sliced through the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, sir, do you see the trident?" "Of course I see it," the judge hissed back, irritated. "What of it?" "Sir," the bailiff's voice was strained, desperate. "That's DEVGRU, that's SEAL Team 6, the skull and crossed rifles. She's not just a SEAL, sir, she's a sniper, a Tier 1 operator." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "Your Honor, you have been lecturing one of this country's most decorated special operators on the nature of extreme pressure." The transformation of Judge Harrison was a terrible and fascinating thing to behold. The smug certainty drained from his face, as if a plug had been pulled. The ruddy, arrogant flush was replaced by a ghastly, waxy pallor. His jaw went slack. His entire universe, a place where his word was law and his judgment was absolute, had just been shattered by a small, frayed piece of fabric. He looked from the patch to Anya, but he wasn't seeing the same woman. He was seeing the ghost now. The quiet logistics coordinator was gone, replaced by a warrior who had walked through hell and returned with its ice in her eyes. He was seeing someone who had made decisions he couldn't possibly comprehend, in places he didn't know existed, for a cause he had just publicly mocked. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer tense or uncomfortable. It was heavy, reverent, thick with the unspoken weight of sacrifice. The jury stared at Anya, their expressions a mixture of shock and deep, profound respect. Ben's widow was crying silently, but for the first time, a glimmer of hope shone through her tears. Anya Petrova finally broke the silence. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words were for the judge, but they landed on every soul in the room. Her gaze was steady, not with accusation, but with a sorrowful gravity. "The evidence you asked for," she said, her voice clear and strong, "was paid for by men who never came home. Does it satisfy the court?" It was not a question. It was a judgment. Judge Harrison flinched as if struck. He couldn't speak. He fumbled for his gavel, his hand shaking. He brought it down with a weak, rattling tap. This court is in recess," he stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. He didn't stride from the bench. He fled, his black robes trailing behind him like a flag of surrender. Anya picked up her patch, her movements as deliberate as before, and tucked it safely back into its hidden pocket. As she stepped down from the witness stand, the world seemed to part for her. The prosecutor simply nodded, his eyes conveying an apology his words could not. The bailiff held the courtroom door open for her. His head bowed slightly in a gesture of deference. As she walked into the hallway, the old man from the back row was waiting. He stood in her path, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. He was a Vietnam veteran. She could tell by the pins on his cap. They were separated by generations, by different wars fought in different lands, but they were bound by the same invisible thread of service. He didn't offer platitudes or thanks. He simply reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "Thank you for not backing down, sister," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You stood your post." Yanya gave him a small, sad smile. "Always," she replied. "True heroes don't always seek the spotlight. They don't wear capes or boast of their deeds. They are the silent professionals, the quiet warriors who carry the weight of our world on their shoulders without complaint or expectation of reward. They are the Anyas of the world, defined not by the noise they make, but by the unshakable strength of their silence and the depth of their sacrifice. Their battles are often unseen, their scars hidden from view, but their honor is a fortress. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. What did you think of Anya's silent stand for justice? Her story reminds us that respect is not something to be demanded by a title, but something to be earned through character and sacrifice. If you believe in honoring the true silent heroes who walk among us, subscribe to our channel for more stories that deserve to be told.